This week on Head to Head, will Rey rebuild the Jedi Order?
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So this has been a really crazy week for me this week. I haven't had a whole lot of time to actually, catch up on a lot of the Star Wars stuff or anything like that. But there's actually, even though it's been a slower, news cycle or whatever, there have been a good amount of things going on, a good amount of traction with the stuff that is going on in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? Let's just head over to the Cantina and let's have a drink about it.
Exactly. Let's go discuss it. So what do we got first on the Cantina?
Well, J.J. Abrams wants to keep the set very loose and allowing improv for Episode 9. So what do you think about that? I mean, this is the final hurrah for this saga. J.J. Abrams is back at the helm again, ready to do Episode 9. They're already started shooting. And apparently from Oscar Isaac, he said that the set, as far as the morale and everything's a whole lot more loose than it was for 7. And they're even allowing more improvisation for a lot of lines and different things like that. So what do you think that's going to mean for Episode 9?
Oh, man, I have so many different things that I can say in regards to this. Because, number one, I think this is a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that this is actually some of the best Star Wars news that we've had in a long time, to be honest. Because, first of all, it makes sense, right? J.J. Abrams, when he first came on to do The Force Awakens, if you think about that, that means a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, you're coming in going, hey, this guy has to now take Star Wars into a whole new direction. He has to reintroduce it. It's almost like the whole future of the saga. Disney just paid this 4.2 or 6 billion or whatever it was. And now here's the guy that's going to introduce it.
Mm-hmm.
If it failed, then that would have been it. I mean, I don't think that it would have killed the entire franchise, but certainly, you might have gotten, let's say, what happened after The Last Jedi. But at least with The Last Jedi, you had the success of The Force Awakens and Rogue One to where you can go, okay, maybe we can get this back. So now he's relaxed.
Well, yeah, I think also, too, he had to create the characters. I mean, they had to kind of create Finn and Rey. So these are brand new characters that no one has ever seen before. No one knows their backstory or anything like that. So in Episode 7, he had to develop them. But now we're on Episode 9. And so I think both JJ and the actual actors and actresses themselves have kind of settled into the roles, settled into their characters. And they're like, okay, now we can allow for more things to kind of be more natural for them as opposed to just trying to like, okay, what's this person's motivation? Well, now because you've had 2 movies to kind of establish that. And then everybody kind of freaks out about the whole improv and everybody thinks of comedy, and I'm sure there will always be some levity and things like that in the movies, as there always is with Star Wars. However, I think it's just going to allow them to kind of take a hold to their character and kind of try some things. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But at least now you kind of get the actors' input into it. And I think that's going to be entertaining.
And that's the key. You get the actors' input. These actors have lived with these characters now over the course of, like you said, a couple of movies. And if they cared to, they could have even watched or not watched, but they could have read the books, read the comics. There's a lot more out there.
That is true.
As far as source material.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That the actors can find out more about their own characters. So you have to trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also what they can deliver. And this is the thing that I think is good, because everybody forgets that in Empire Strikes Back, when Han Solo said, "I know," after Leia said, "I love you," that was not the original scripted line.
Right. It was "me too," or I love you too. Yeah. But then Harrison Ford being Harrison, like, that's not what he was saying.
Yeah.
He would say this.
Exactly. And he knew Han Solo well enough to say, you know what? Han Solo wouldn't say that.
Yeah, because he's that kind of a cocky, arrogant guy.
Right. And that ended up being one of the most iconic Star Wars lines ever.
Yep.
All because it was improv. And that's the kind of improv. I think when people are thinking improv, they're thinking that Lord and Miller thing where let's just throw the whole script out the window and just do complete improv scenes. I think it's really more along the lines of what they were allowed to do in the original trilogy, where they were allowed to improvise certain lines or see what feels good. Not to mention the fact that, and other people have made this point too, where, they might actually say it as it was scripted,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe do another take where they do some improv on it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then see which one's better.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like you say, you can really get a chance to hone in on your character and, bring things out. I think you could, especially with Oscar Isaac's character with Poe Dameron.
Yeah.
He's kind of like the new Han Solo, so you kind of expect him to kind of be a little bit more brash and,
Aloof.
yeah, kind of aloof. So I think that's going to be fun. And then even Finn is always coming up with the whole comedic relief. Even though his character doesn't necessarily intend to be funny, it's funny. Just because, like, it's like, well, I'm kind of a big deal in the Resistance. So then I kept calling him Big Deal. Like, and that's just stuff like that is kind of funny.
Exactly. It ends up being more the situations he's in. And that's, I thought that the character of Finn was a really refreshing character because you also have to remember this guy was a stormtrooper.
Yeah, and he's kind of freaked out. And that's the cool, he's kind of like this. He's kind of like a weird version of, to me, like Kevin Hart, like the character Kevin Hart plays in a lot of movies where he's kind of like always on edge and like, what are we doing? Why do we have to go over here? And that makes for great comedy because when you have someone who's constantly anxious, it just
versus telling jokes, it's more like situational comedy, and that's what we usually get out of Finn. Yeah. So I think that with those two characters, you're right. There's a lot that they could do comedy-wise, but then I hope that they actually have more for Finn to do in this movie than they did The Last Jedi, even though he was in, once he woke up, he was actually in quite a bit of the movie. Yeah,
it's just that his development wasn't as strong as we would have liked. But
yeah, I thought he was actually more well-developed in The Force Awakens than The Last Jedi,
I agree.
Honestly. But, this is a good thing, though. I think overall what this is going to mean for us as fans is that we're going to get a better movie out of this.
Yeah, and I think JJ, just being JJ, I think he's going to be more laid back. He doesn't have as much pressure. I still think he has a lot of pressure just because.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I was going to say, man.
Well, after 8, people are kind of like, but I think because it's JJ and he did really well with the first in the series with Force Awakens, and now he's going to bring it home. I think he's kind of got the pressure of, I got to try to hopefully correct or clean up some of the mess from 8, but I think we have to really hit it out the park. And I think being calm and being able to be in your element and settle in, that allows for that to happen.
Yeah. But on the flip side of that to me, though, is that in a lot of ways he has as much or even more pressure because now he has to tie everything together.
Yeah.
So not only was he responsible for actually reintroducing the series in a lot of ways and reigniting the love of the series when he made The Force Awakens, now he's tasked with actually tying up the series and bringing the entire saga to a close for all 9 movies.
Yeah, he's got a lot of work to do.
And, of course, it was one of those situations, too, where he wasn't even the original guy.
Right.
It's not too far removed from what Ron Howard had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, JJ got more notice, to where 80% of the movie wasn't shot when he took over. But still, he probably would have still executive produced the thing. So he probably wasn't too far removed from the whole process anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But still, yeah, I think but overall, I think that we're going to get a much, much better movie than, I think we're going to get what we hope we get out of this one, in other words.
Yeah, awesome. So our next thing is George Lucas visited the Mandalorian set.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he popped up for Jon Favreau's birthday, actually. He kind of gave him a little birthday surprise and popped up on...
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, Jon Favreau is one of the directors on Mandalorian along with Dave Filoni. And Dave Filoni is kind of George Lucas's protege when they did the whole Clone Wars series.
Yeah, and Favreau, this is actually Favreau's series.
Yeah, this is actually his series.
He's...
But Filoni's doing a couple episodes, too.
Well, Filoni's doing the pilot. So that's, like we talked about on the last thing, that's a huge thing because that just shows how much he trusts him.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there are some things that kind of happened on that set, and we'll probably talk about a little bit later on another podcast. But George Lucas definitely popped up, and he took some pictures, and it's good to see that George is still involved.
That's the thing that surprised me the most was that I could see him being involved in the movie, but I was really shocked when he popped up on the set
Oh, the TV series?
Yeah, the TV series. Although it makes sense, though, because he was going to do a live-action series.
Yeah, and maybe this was kind of something that he was going to do anyway.
Well, that's the thing. He was going to. There was that whole 1313 thing, the underworld of Coruscant, and a lot of people have been wondering, myself included, if some of the scripts or at least story ideas didn't make their way into this series.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, and it's still good to have Lucas around just to kind of have that presence of knowing, like, okay, the creator is still here. He can still, his input is still valued. He can still kind of influence some things as far as the characters and how they're going about it. Or he can say, like, guys, I don't know if that'll work, but
yeah, that's actually, honestly, that's what made me happy. That totally made me happy when he was on the set. It was a surprise, but it was certainly a pleasant one, because I'm like, finally, they're letting this guy, be more, because it seemed like when Disney first bought it, they kind of shut him out.
Yeah.
They rejected his script ideas for the sequel trilogy, and then it was almost like he wasn't, it was kind of like one of those things where we have to invite him to, we have to do all this stuff, but we don't really want him there.
What makes you also wonder, like, with the fans being somewhat critical of Last Jedi, you kind of wonder, it makes you wonder, like, what would George have done?
Oh, we know what George would have done. They actually had a whole, they finally released, at least, George actually talked about what he would have done for the sequel trilogy. That's out there, so if you guys want to find it on the internet, it's actually pretty interesting. It's a little bit, it's actually way different, and in a way, I'm really happy that he didn't do it. But on the other hand, it is an interesting story, though.
Yeah.
It's a cool story. But, I mean, that's the thing, is what was funny about it is, first when he did the prequels and everybody was like, oh, thank goodness George doesn't have anything to do with Star Wars anymore. Now we can get some good stuff. And then after The Last Jedi, now everybody is like, well, why don't they just let George do another one?
Well, the thing about George Lucas is he's a great storyteller.
Yeah, if they let him write it.
And that's what I'm saying. Like,
that's the thing. Let him write it.
And then let somebody come up with the dialogue and things like that. And
pretty much like what they did with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
And that's why they were
let somebody else direct it, somebody that actually knows how to direct actors and, and actually make a good movie. Not that George Lucas can't. I mean, he directed Red Tails, didn't he? Or did he not? Or did he just produce that? Now I got to look that up.
Yeah, I think he. Well, I know he produced it.
Yeah, Red Tails is basically like his movie.
Yeah,
but let's see.
But just I think this is cool. This is really cool for Star Wars, though. I think this is really cool for Star Wars.
He directed along with Anthony Hemingway.
Okay.
So yeah. So I mean, and it's very cool for Star Wars because, he's, like you said, he's getting his input in there.
Mm-hmm.
So we still get that George Lucas story influence.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still a part of it, and we still kind of feel like George is there.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that they're going to benefit from his storytelling ability, because I actually have high hopes for this series.
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of like the old Western gunslinger type thing, so this seems to be kind of interesting. Just the whole Mandalorian.
Yeah, we're going to learn more about the Mandalorian culture, more than likely.
Yep.
I'd like to see what they do with Boba Fett. I can't imagine him not being in this.
Or at least mentioned.
Or mentioned. At least what I'm hoping is that what would be really cool, rather than do a movie, is if they actually have his story appear in this episode. Because remember, this actually takes place 6 years after Return of the Jedi?
Right.
So do an episode about, well, how did Boba Fett get out of the Sarlacc, or at least how did his armor get out of there? Because we know canon-wise, somebody else, I forgot who it was, has his armor now.
Right. Well, that's remains to be seen. So
yeah,
we can't wait to see what Mandalorian brings us.
Well, next we have, will Kylo have an apprentice in Episode 9?
This is a big one for me. I think that
big one good or big one bad?
Well, I just would really like to. Here's the thing. I think that it would be really great if he did, but once again, there's so many characters and stories that we have to tell and conclude in 9.
Yeah,
adding an apprentice,
that is a good point.
It's like
what that reminds me of? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the Batman movies, the Tim Burton era ones.
Yeah.
Where once he was done and they kept trying to cram in more and more villains. And then you had Robin. So you got to tell, like, okay, his origin story. Then you got to tell, like, 3 or 4 other villains' origin story. And it's like, guys, just pick one. That's why the first Batman movie worked so well. You just had the Joker. Yep. And that was it.
And even Batman Returns was still done well. Yeah. But it's just still like, because of the way he did it. But once it got to all the other series, and that's what I fear what would happen if they brought an apprentice in for Kylo, because then it's like, all right, well, where did he come from? And then now you have to explain kind of his backstory. And then you got to see his relationship with Kylo Ren. And then, once again, we still have to figure out what's going on with Rey, what's going on with Poe, and everybody else.
It really does depend, though, on how they handle it. Because it's true. I think one of the things that made the original trilogy work so well is the fact that you really had a very simple storytelling.
Exactly.
Even when you started, like in Empire was when you started splitting everybody up. But you had on one hand, Luke going off to train with Yoda. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, you were telling what was going on with Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and C-3PO, right? So you had, and then of course the Empire.
Right.
So you had Darth Vader and then of course how the Empire was still hunting down, the rebels and trying to find Luke and all that. So you basically had like 3 stories going on in Empire. And you had about that in Return of the Jedi, because they almost mirrored it. Now you have Luke, Yoda, and then when he's facing Darth Vader and the Emperor, and then you have the rest of them as they were going to mount their attack on the moon of Endor, and then, you still had the Jabba the Hutt sequence. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that united the characters. That's what started everybody off together, and then they split up again. But that's generally how it was. They would start out together, and then they would split off.
Right.
So if they handle that in a similar sense, as long as they didn't try to tell too many stories, you could almost successfully do that. Or what you could do is you can introduce an apprentice and then have that story continue off into a possible spin-off movie. So in other words, you don't deal with it like from, the first act of the movie or something. Maybe it's a third act thing that you find out.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing is, like I said, and with episode 9, you have all these different characters that has so much or should have so much to do. So you have Poe, you have Finn. We got to figure out what Rey's doing. And then people
there's
and then, Kylo still has to, we still haven't seen the fullest extent of Kylo, because like in the original trilogy, Vader was already Vader. But we're still watching this guy grow up into the dark. And that's the thing, is like everybody's still growing up into this stuff. Whereas the only person who was growing up really was Luke. Yeah. Because Leia was already a politician. She was already kind of cemented.
Everybody was pretty much in their roles.
Han was already a grown-up smuggler, so he kind of, was doing his thing. And even when you bring in Lando, and those guys were even Lando and Yoda were like, although they were pivotal characters, they weren't the main focus. Mm-hmm. Yoda had his time with Luke. He gave him enough what he needed to do, and then he moved on. But this is like, we're still watching these people grow up, essentially, because Poe still is growing up as a leader. Rey is trying to grow up as a leader. Kylo is trying to grow up as a leader.
Well, you can make that argument with Han, too, though. He went from being a smuggler, only thinking about himself, growing into a selfless anti-hero, I guess, in a general in the rebellion.
Yeah, I mean...
And that was a journey.
Yeah,
you could argue that that's like Poe's journey right now.
Yeah, but okay, and I can give you that. But
now it's like a Duel of the Fates thing.
But then you still, like I said, you still have all these other characters, because you still have this whole budding romance with Finn and Rose. I mean, there's this.
I thought you were going to say Finn and Poe.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't do that.
But that's just my take, and I think an apprentice would just cloud that. No pun intended.
Well, I would what I would rather see is what's going on with the Knights of Ren. They introduced this really cool concept, and then it's like nothing at all. We get.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
that don't give me an apprentice. These are your guys.
Exactly, and that's that's where I would rather them go with it, is have Kylo and the Knights a friend, because he's going to need somebody, and that kind of goes in. We'll kind of start speculating about our feature story a little bit later, but yeah, I think that he's going to need someone to kind of help him combat Rey.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a big thing. So
he has Hux.
Oh my goodness. Hux is probably trying to be nowhere near Kylo. But
well, it'll be interesting because, you know, like you said, there's a lot they're going to have to do, a lot they're going to have to tie in. You know, they're trying to tie in even all 9. At least that's the rumor. They're trying to tie in all 9 movies. It's going to be a fascinating thing to see what they end up doing. I mean, I think more than any of the movies, this is probably the one. Well, no, you could say that about 7 too, because that was a blank slate. We had no idea where anything was going to go. But
we don't. I mean, I feel like that with all the movies.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true, because you didn't know where they were going to continue. But this one, more than maybe equal with 7, it's like, how are they going to tie all this together?
Yeah,
and are they going to tie it together, or are they going to save a little bit to spin off a possible next trilogy?
Yeah, and then that's why I even brought up the whole, when we talked about last time on the podcast about splitting 9 in 2 pieces.
Oh, yeah, right.
Or in 2 parts, because you might need that to make sure everything is done the way it needs to be done. But then even just to go back to the whole Kylo and apprentice thing, I just think that he's not even really a master of anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's
so like, how are you going to be an
too.
apprentice?
Well,
like,
if you think about it, remember when he was dueling Rey in 7? He's just all like, "You need a teacher." I mean, it's just like he was so like abrupt and just. I mean, it's like, dude, what's your problem? I don't think you're ready to teach anybody.
Yeah, it's like,
honestly, you're kind of high strung. I mean, he certainly doesn't have the patience to be a teacher.
Well, not only that, but I mean, he's still looking at Snoke to teach him stuff. He's like, well, if you with your teaching, I could learn how to do this and I could be stronger. And like, he's still learning, even in 8.
Yeah,
you know, he was still saying
at the end of 8, though, I think that he finally, especially once he killed Snoke, I think he was just kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I'm the guy now. And you could tell that his character, even though he was still every bit as erratic and unpredictable, there was more control, though. You know, like he was more assertive and he was more like he had a plan now. It's like he has a direction. I feel like Kylo now has a direction. He wasn't that same guy from 7 that, you know, he was tempted by the light, didn't really know what he wanted to do. He was trying to be more like his grandfather, and he was looking for Snoke to do for him what the Emperor did for Vader, kind of a thing.
Right.
You know, now I think he pretty much is like, you know what? Forget all the past stuff. I'm done with that. I know what it is I'm trying to do. I know what I need to do. I'm going to make that happen now.
Well, yeah, I guess we just have to wait for episode 9.
All right. Well, I think it's time to leave the cantina.
Yep. Let's leave out here.
Yeah, you're going to have to put your drink down and pay the tab.
Send the waitress over.
That's right. So what do we got?
Next, we have Duel of the Fates. And on today's Duel of the Fates, we have
the Clone Troopers versus the First Order Troopers. Who's better?
So
I think it's actually funny that you specify the First Order Troopers.
Versus.
See, by the way, everybody, Darryl wrote the outline this week, so it was kind of a surprise to me. But that's what actually stood out to me. Was the fact you did not say Clone Troopers versus Stormtroopers,
right.
And it would be correct to say that they're Stormtroopers because they are. But you mean the First Order era?
Yep, First Order era. I think because we all kind of know, like the Stormtroopers, they couldn't shoot worth anything. So I think that the Clone Troopers were definitely super military trained and they were super effective. I mean, just the way they moved, the way they talked to each other, they had that bond and camaraderie because they were all clones of each other. So you're naturally going to have that. However, I think that with the First Order Troopers, one, I will say their uniforms are a lot cooler. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Clone Troopers uniforms were cool too. But I just think that they were almost a little bit more vicious.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because it's exactly what I was going to say, that they were more vicious and a little bit just
this all out nasty. Almost like,
I mean, they're
like almost like Nazis or something, man. I mean, these guys just walking.
That was exactly the word I was thinking of. I was, when you were talking and everything, and I was processing all of it, and that was one of the things that I was thinking about, was the fact that one of the major differences is they're vicious.
Yeah.
There's more of a harder edge to them.
And I think it's because what we learned from, they go find these kids, much like they did with the Jedi Order, but they find these kids when they're young and they basically train them from the time that they were kids and to be these war machines, essentially. Yeah, soldiers.
Here's something you got to remember, too, is the fact that the clone troopers were actually good guys.
Yeah.
I mean, for, up until the end of Revenge of the Sith. Yeah. But even then, you could still make the argument they're good guys because they're defending the Republic. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that they looked upon the Jedi because of that Order 66 programming they had.
Yep.
But Palpatine was the rightful, more or less,
owner, or
he was the guy in charge. He was the Supreme Chancellor.
Yeah, this is like the president is saying, making a directive order. It's like, all right, well,
saying that this other branch is an enemy of the country now, and we have to extinguish them.
Yep.
Well, I mean, especially when you look at everybody's distrust of government anyway, it really wouldn't come as a surprise, and we might actually go along with it. Like, well, all right, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's probably how the people of the Republic viewed it, was like, oh, I guess the Jedi, and a lot of them, you find out through the canon novels and everything. But I mean, it stands to reason that when you have beings with this much power, so far you're raised to go, okay, they're protecting you. And it's almost something they bring up in the Marvel movies. Like, when the military is like, guys, yeah, I get it. They're taking kittens out of trees and they're, defending us against these other people. But what happens if they decide they just want to take over? Who's going to stop them?
Exactly.
And that's probably how people felt about the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you spin things, which of course Palpatine did throughout his term, to make things look a little bit like, hey, the Jedi are we got to watch those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, look, they snapped. Look at what they did to me. And you suddenly look and he's completely disfigured. And yeah, if you're a normal guy, so naturally the clone troopers are just going to be like, well, all right.
Well, I mean, that program was embedded in them because the Emperor knew from day one when he commissioned for them to get, he knew that. He
was playing both sides.
Exactly, and that's what he's the ultimate strategist.
But we know that. I'm talking about when you look at it from the mass citizen of the Republic.
Yeah, from the mass public perspective. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, people are always, worried about people who have too much power. I mean, even look at society right now, the police are looked at as, hey, keeping law and order. But then sometimes when you hear on the news when cops are taking, drug money or they're found, doing stuff to people in jail or killing people on the streets unlawfully,
it's kind of like
it makes people not want to trust, your own people who are designed to protect you.
And that's the thing. And that, okay, in any organization, there's going to be some bad apples.
Absolutely.
And you try to implement things to prevent that, but sometimes it's kind of difficult if too many people from a certain organization start to do bad things. At what point do you look at the organization and say the organization is bad?
Yeah, it's cancerous and you have to cut it out.
And that's kind of what's happening here. But I thought that one of the things that was cool about the prequels was the fact that they spun the whole story to make the Stormtroopers the good guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I think.
And it was an interesting story arc to me.
Yeah, the clone troopers, I think, were also ultimately, in my opinion, the better
I think
soldier or trooper, just simply because they were more skilled to me from what I've seen thus far. As far as the way they attack, the way they strategize. I mean, they actually had people
now
who,
if you're talking,
like being effective. That's what I mean.
Sure.
Like
as a team, right? So you're talking about like if a battalion of clone troopers faced off against a battalion of stormtroopers, First Order era stormtroopers, who would win?
Yeah,
I still say that they would put up a better fight, but the clone troopers would still, mow them down. Yeah, to be honest,
I think that the First Order troopers would just go in guns are blazing and they'll just try to take down how many they could. But I think the clone troopers will be a little bit more strategic in their planning as far as how they went about doing that.
Yeah, but you do bring up a good point, though, is the fact that we've seen more on the clone troopers.
True.
Because you also have to look at the Clone Wars, animated series, I mean, you heard a little bit through other means too.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been exposed more to the whole idea of the clone troopers.
Yeah, but I will say the First Order troopers, they even have, even that moment where Finn faced off against one of the one that called him a traitor.
Yeah.
And he had that weird, I don't know what type of weapon that was, that he was going to get that blocked lightsabers. But that's what I'm saying. Like, their fighting style is still pretty, they know they can fight with guns or with, they're not just like the Stormtroopers of the original trilogy where they're just...
Well, the funny thing about running
around.
The Stormtroopers of the original trilogy get a bad rap because of George Lucas's direction. But if you actually look at what they're capable of and how they're actually depicted in canon novels and also just pretty much anything beyond the movies, the idea behind them is that they're supposed to be like really... I mean, the thing that trips me out the most, it's one of the biggest oxymorons of the whole original trilogy. We know notoriously that they can't seem to hit a target, even though they're like the A-team of space, right? The A-team would fire, and they did that because they didn't want to promote violence and all that. But, my dad used to point this out all the time, that you got like 6 guys with automatic weapons just spraying them anywhere. And he was like, even if they didn't want to hit anybody, statistics say they would unintentionally hit somebody.
Right.
And it's the same thing with them. But what's funny is when you go to A New Hope, and Obi-Wan's over there, Ben Kenobi, is over there going, oh, and these blast marks, only Imperial stormtroopers could be so precise. And I'm thinking, really? When? When have we seen them being so precise?
Exactly.
So they do, in the movies, they were depicted a little bit more like the Keystone Cops.
Mm-hmm.
Or, just almost like slapstick bumbling, idiots, basically. But really, they were supposed to be more of an elite fighting force.
Well, yeah, I mean, and even if you really look at like Rogue One, by the time we looked at Rogue One.
Yeah, now Rogue One, actually, see, that depiction of the Stormtroopers, I think, righted a wrong, because they were...
Because even when you brought those Death Troopers into those guys.
Now, the Death Troopers, yeah. Well, that's the answer to everything.
And that's their Special Forces guys.
Yeah, they just bring in, like, new battalions because, and they started this with the whole Clone Trooper thing where it's like they started coming up with all these different divisions of Stormtrooper. I mean, they did that to a degree in the original trilogy, right? You had the Snow Troopers, which you always said looked like the KKK of the...
Yeah, and then the one...
There was a little bit of a resemblance, and then you had the Biker Scouts, Return of the Jedi. So, I mean, you did have... But they got really crazy, though. By the time you get to Rogue One, and then just a lot of the novels, you got, like, Desert Troopers that have, like, more safari, brownish, tannish-looking armor.
Yep.
I mean, you got like all kinds of like forest troopers and, so I mean, that's how they basically retcon that whole thing.
So let's just settle it.
All right.
Are you going Clone Trooper?
I'm going Clone Trooper.
All right, me too.
All right.
I'm going Clone Trooper.
Well, that's it for Duel of the Fates. So what do we got?
Well, next we have From a Certain Point of View, our featured topic.
Oh, yeah, this is actually, even though sometimes I know it probably feels to you guys like every topic on this show is a featured topic, I mean, that is kind of the idea, right? And this is actually the one that we like to spend a little bit of time on.
Yeah, so today we're actually going to talk about, will Rey rebuild the Jedi Order in Episode 9? Now, for me, I go back and forth. I think that she will attempt to.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of different things that have to be put in place. One being, yes, we know that she has the Jedi text that Luke had on Octo. However, we have to answer the question first, is Rey herself even a Jedi? And she's not.
Well, there's another
From what we
thing,
can say.
That's true, but there's another thing that will even determine that more so, is that how much time has passed between 8 and 9.
Exactly.
If, like, they say, oh, it's been 10 years, then I would say, well, all right, maybe she has rebuilt the Jedi Order. Because here's my thing. They have to do one of two things. They either have to have enough time pass to where when the movie opens, it's like in the crawl text, Rey has rebuilt the Jedi Order, blah, blah, blah. And then we come out and she's just full on got all these Jedi running around. Or she's you're seeing it maybe a couple of years after The Last Jedi to where she's a little bit more skilled, you know, because, I mean, depending on the source of why she's so powerful so quickly will determine greatly on how this is all going to shake out, because Luke, we know now why Luke was so adept at the Force and all that, but we didn't know then. It just seemed like, okay, you have this prodigious Force ability. And so, you know, every time he turned around, he kept thinking, well, now I'm a Jedi. And of course, Yoda or Obi-Wan's like, no.
Not yet.
Not yet. There's still another thing you got to do. And, you know, even I remember as a kid, you know, all me and my friends were just like, well, come on, man. I mean, what do you really have to do? I mean, you know, this guy could do things you couldn't do.
Well, and that's the thing about, and that's one of the big things, because either you had to go through the Jedi trials or you had to kill a Sith Lord. Well, right now, there aren't any Sith.
That's like testing out of a class.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, if you kill a Sith Lord, then, you know, you can just jump to, like, graduation.
Exactly.
And you're good.
Exactly. It's like when I swam 100 laps so I can pass swimming.
If it were me, I would find, like, the weakest Sith Lord I could possibly find.
Right.
And kill him.
Like the guy who just got promoted to Sith. And
yeah, right. Exactly. Like, just blindside him or something, you know? Just like, who's the weakest guy you got?
But the thing is, I think that's where it's going to be kind of weird, because, like, you almost have to make Rey a Jedi to begin with. And there's even some questions from our fans who ask a question kind of that ties into this whole thing.
Is it going to be... Well, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there are questions where people have said, like, well, is Rey really a Jedi? And
because Luke, I mean, he left her kind of out there. But see, that's the question that we have to... Because there's speculation is Luke coming back.
Well, there's that, but let's just... Even disregarding whether or not Luke comes back, because that's really not going to affect her status, at least right now. You can look at the end of The Last Jedi, and when we last see her, she's just levitating a ton of rocks and just standing there all, you know, almost superhero pose like.
Right.
Just holding all these boulders in the air. That might have been Rian Johnson's way of saying to us, like, yeah, guys.
She's there.
She's there. She's good. But it depends on how they want to juxtapose it and how they... Because one of the interesting things about this whole thing, and I'll probably even talk about this a little in one of the questions that we have in our Clear Your Mind segment, is that one of the things I really like about the sequel trilogy is they're giving us a little bit more background on the Force, and they're playing with it a little bit. It's not as simplistic as it was. They're taking it in slightly different directions. So when you look at, you know, what everybody lovingly calls Broom Kid at the end.
Oh, yeah.
They're almost trying to tell you, like, you know what? The Force is just kind of like... Because they're painting a picture almost like the Force is able to now do what it wants to do. You know, before it was an energy that people would tap into, but now it's sort of like this living thing that does things like, oh, wait, Dark's rising? Well, I'll bring up a light side guy now. I mean, it's sort of like...
Well, I think it's always kind of been that way. We just never really saw it from this point of view.
Well, right.
And I think
that's what I mean, though, is the fact that because the way the story was told was more simplistic.
Yeah, because they always said, like, it's the will of the Force. And so, like, that gives the...
Well, yeah, they introduced that in the prequel, though. Qui-Gon was the one that said that. But if you actually look in the original trilogy, the most that we get from the Force is it's an energy that surrounds us, binds us, penetrates us. You know, it can...
It's in all living things.
Yeah, you know, it basically... It will guide you. So in that sense, there is... But, I mean, it's the sequel trilogy is where it's really starting to get, like, the Force is getting godlike in a way. Like, okay, it's going to try to do things to manipulate certain elements of, you know, what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the Force, even, like I said, they're always talking about balance. And I think that's, you know, I think all these things are kind of coming into fruition with this series, is that because, like Snoke said, okay, where dark rises, light comes to meet it.
That's true.
So
and
that's
not
balance.
Necessarily be thinking. It could just be that, it's just trying to maintain a balance.
Yeah, it's more so like, okay, everything has to, with every action, there's a negative action, there's a positive reaction. I mean,
but still, that little broom kid never seemed to really train. He just did what he did.
Yeah,
and I think what they're trying to show, and this is where it's going to get tricky, especially when people say, is Rey a Jedi? Maybe, maybe not. What the sequel trilogy seems to try to be teaching us through not only the actions, but a lot of things that Luke was saying when he was like, it's time for the Jedi to end and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's trying to say, look, the Force is bigger than the Jedi and Sith.
Yeah.
And the problem with the Jedi and Sith is they see the thing and like, okay, you either have to be us or them. And they own it.
Right.
We own the light side. You own the dark side. And
fight.
And it's basically like there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
And so consequently, what we're learning in The Last Jedi, particularly at the end, is like, look, there's a lot of people that have this ability that aren't Jedi or Sith.
Well, that's because Jedi and Sith is more of a indoctrination, or it's more a religion. And that's why even in the original trilogy, he said, don't try to fool us with your source ways over, your devotion to that ancient religion is like, because there's a certain rules and things that govern and how they use it.
Kind of like, when he was trying to say that Obi-Wan was surely he must be dead, I'm afraid you are all that's left of that religion or something like that.
Yeah.
There's definitely a doctrine to it.
Yeah, and I think that's what
light or dark. But I mean, the thing is that, it's going to be interesting how they go forward with this too, because because you do have other dark side and other light side users that are not Jedi or Sith. So it's kind of like, there's still a light and dark.
Right. So
it'll be really interesting to me to see, what they do with this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I feel like Rey, as far as rebuilding the Jedi Order, I think, like I said, I think she has to become one herself, and then she has to really almost become a master, not just become a Jedi, but she has to become a master.
Well, yes, because in the situation she's in. But again, I mean, it's true. She has all the tech, she has all the stuff. And I would just think that it's going to be, how long has it been since we last see her in 8? So when does episode 9 take place? If it's 5 to 10 years, conceivably, I could see her being a Jedi.
Or it could be the same situation. Honestly, it could be the same situation we saw in Rebels with Kanan and Ezra, because Kanan wasn't really a Jedi master.
That's true. Well, he wasn't even a Jedi. Kind of a Padawan.
He was technically still a Padawan.
Yeah, he was still a Padawan.
But then once he trained Ezra in what he knew, then it's like, okay, well, then he kind of, and it's like, we still don't even really know if that really truly elevated him to at least a Jedi or a Jedi master. But, and that's what. Well,
I think he did become a Jedi Knight, though, in that one episode where he was facing all those apparitions
in
that temple. Yeah, and something basically said like, "Oh, you're a Jedi Knight now" or something. I don't really remember the episode too clearly, but I think he did eventually become a Jedi Knight. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he did officially make the official rank of Knight. But that's what I'm saying. I think it's just so much. And that does beg to answer the question, was Luke the last Jedi? Because if Rey never becomes a true Jedi...
Well, the thing is that Luke said he's not the last Jedi. That's the thing. So, I mean, I guess she is. And he did train her. I mean...
Yeah, but if she doesn't, that's if she continues down that path.
Well, and she has all the techs.
Yeah, she has the techs to do it, but if she does, or if she might decide like Kylo, like, you know what?
Well, it'll be interesting because I honestly think that she'll rebuild it, because I think that one of the things that she was trying to teach Luke was like, listen, the universe needs you guys. Yeah. They need the Jedi. They need Luke Skywalker, the Jedi hero. It's like they don't just need good Force users. You need that organization to show like these guys represent something. Because the Jedi don't just have the powers; they actually represent something.
That is true.
The Sith represent something.
True.
So I think that because she has this whole high regard for it, that she'll do it. But I think that she'll use what Luke has learned, because Luke had the same thing. And, Really, it was more like Anakin had that, because Anakin wanted to be a Jedi from the time he was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Luke didn't even really know anything about them, but once he learned about them, he really wanted to honor his dad.
Right.
So he wanted to be one too. So, I mean, it'll be interesting because I think Rey has noble reasons as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she's going to, but I don't know if we're going to see that 9. That's the thing.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think she's going to eventually do it. I think it's just good because I think that's going to be a good thing for the fans, like to see the Jedi start again, and
Absolutely.
So I think she's going to rebuild the Order.
Yeah, forget Rey. Disney's going to rebuild the Jedi Order. Because the Jedi Order equals dollars.
Indeed.
People want to see lightsabers. People want to see Jedi running around.
Exactly.
So somebody's going to rebuild the Order.
Yes, only money.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, it's time for our final segment that we lovingly call Clear Your Mind. That's right, everybody. This is where we answer your questions. So please keep them coming in, because actually this is one, I mean, we love all the segments in the show, don't get me wrong, but we really like to answer your questions because now we feel like we're having a real discussion with you guys, not just questions or topics or whatever that we're coming up with. So what's our first one?
Our first question comes from Chris Moore. And the question is, will we see new Force abilities in Episode 9?
No, this is almost like an extension of our certain point of view topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly saw a new one in 8.
Yeah, the whole doppelganger.
Yeah, the whole Force doppelganger. And we even talked about that in one of our previous episodes where we're like, imagine how much power you had to have.
Yeah.
To even be able to do it, much less sustain it.
Well, and the other one, like you brought up, is the fact that Yoda was actually able to physically touch Luke.
Yeah, so you have kind of a dual thing going on, right? So you have what people are doing in life, but even as a Force ghost, the new trilogy is expanding even what Force ghosts can do. Mm-hmm. These guys aren't just apparitions, floating in the air. I mean, even if you look at the difference between the Force ghosts from Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi, I mean, Obi-Wan now is all like moving stuff around. He's sitting on a log. It's like, okay, you're like a ghost, man. How are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
So they're really advancing it. Now, yeah, you can physically touch Yoda. Yoda's physically touching Luke.
Mm-hmm. And causing things to happen in the real world.
Yeah, he's causing things
like
to happen in the real world.
Lightning bolts hitting trees.
I mean, he wasn't even doing that stuff in his prime.
So.
Well, and then, I don't remember where this is from. I don't remember if this is from a story or what, but there's a canon source. Might have been the comics. There's a canon source that talks about how when Luke discovered the whole sand people thing, how, and then he was like, oh, well, the droid that must have led him to home, and then he runs off to check on Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. Basically, while Obi-Wan was waiting for him, that's when Qui-Gon appeared to him and taught him the whole Force Ghost thing. That's why he was then able, with this newly learned skill, to go up to Vader and be like, yeah, if you strike me down, I'll be more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Because now he knows how to do this Force Ghost thing.
Right.
So, it's just interesting to me because they have been expanding on this for a while. So, who knows? I mean, when Yoda and him were, talking or whatever, we saw a part of that, but we don't know what Yoda said to him after the scene cuts.
Yeah, and throughout the movies, at least in every trilogy, we've seen new Force powers.
Yeah, that's true.
Because in the prequels, you had Yoda absorbing Force lightning. We've never seen that before. Obi-Wan did it with his lightsaber. So you have...
Well, and don't even forget, even in the sequel trilogy, right? You have basically Kylo stopping a laser bolt and holding it there.
Yeah, even to his ship left.
Different things, or how Snoke just had Rey in midair, just paralyzed and choking her,
or just being able to meld the minds of
or connecting
Rey.
The minds of two people. That's pretty huge.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, so I mean, it stands to reason that in each of the movies, and you don't even have to go by trilogy, you can actually go individually. So from episode 1 to 2 to 3, each of those movies seem to introduce a different Force power.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see something different, especially now that Rey is young, and we talked about the whole fighting styles and things in the last podcast. So even them using Force abilities because it's new to them, besides moving rocks and, doing all that stuff, I'm sure we'll see some more acrobatic stuff or some abilities like, whoa, I even know you can do that, or, it's just... Well,
and especially because Mark Hamill's confirmed to be in the cast, so...
Yeah.
My guess is he's going to be a Force ghost.
Yeah, training Rey and giving her some information.
Or doing something, so who knows what new thing he's going to introduce. I mean, so I would think that the chances are like 95 to 99% in my mind anyway, that there's going to be a new Force power exhibited in Episode 9. There has to be.
Yep. Yeah, I think JJ wants once again to leave his mark on the franchise too. It's like, yeah, I brought that in here too, and I think that's...
Right, it's my Force power.
Yep.
All right, what do we have next?
The next question comes from Janelle Pickett. And her question is, did the Force kill Luke in The Last Jedi?
Yeah, it's funny because there's been speculation of this and that I've, read or heard about. This is another thing that just seems to be going around the fandom lately. As you know, that I do a lot of the Quora questions, Quora.com. And there's a lot of people now that actually ask me questions specifically. And this is another one that's been coming up, even though I don't know if anybody actually asked me this one or not. But yeah, I think there's a good chance that it could have, but I don't necessarily think that the Force killed Luke. I think what happened was Luke using the Force. Because here's the thing you got to look at. He hadn't used the Force in years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's almost like, it was funny because I was watching Jedi Council the other day, last night, in fact, and they actually brought this up. And one of the things that they brought up, which I thought was interesting, was the fact that it's like, okay, he hasn't used the Force in so long. It's almost like a heroin addict. A heroin addict, doesn't use heroin for like 10 years. And then if they slip and use heroin again, it just kills them. Now, it didn't kill them before because their body had been used to it or whatever, but because they didn't use it for a while and then they used it again.
Mm-hmm.
And, here you see Luke hadn't even tapped into the Force. He closed himself off from the Force.
Well, not only did he do that, but it's not like he just came back and it's like, okay, I'm back and using the Force and I move a couple of rocks around.
Yeah,
he used
this Force push something. He ended up using this power that was incredibly draining. And I think that's the thing, is that he knew this was going to kill him, but he also knew... I mean, you go back and forth. It's kind of like, yeah, you could have just hopped on a ship or something and just gone back with them and
water.
Yep, and just flown back and did this all in person. But I mean, that's another probably good discussion topic for a future podcast, is why did Luke choose to do that in the way that he did? But keeping that in mind, yeah, this wasn't like a Force push or something like, or building his lightsaber or whatever. I mean, this is a big thing. And it probably drained him.
I'm going to step out on a limb here. I'm going to say Luke isn't dead. I think, and this could be a new Force power.
Force resurrection?
Just saying. Well, I think what Luke may have gotten, because I also look at it from the standpoint of and you do make a very, very great point about the fact that he closed himself off from the Force, and so the fact that he jumped back in it with like this heavy hitting Force power, it's kind of like, God, this is not what you want to start off with when you want to. It's like working out. Like, you haven't worked out for like months, and then you want to throw a 350 on the plate,
or like years. You haven't worked out in years. You've been sitting on the couch eating potato chips, and all of a sudden you go out and run a 5K and then lift 300 pounds or something. It might tax your heart a little bit.
However, I think about this. Luke is the grandson of the Force.
Well, yeah.
So to me, I think that Luke became so powerful, and I don't think we even really understand the true depth of his power, that he could actually go between both sides.
Well, here's another thing, and this has been theorized for a while too, Now, they theorized it about, we discussed it on the show about Palpatine, but Luke has Darth Plagueis' book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we discussed that too. But, and I don't know, it's been a minute, but I think that one could possibly theorize that, you know, because Luke had Darth Plagueis' book about how to come back from the dead or how to cheat death or whatever, maybe he sort of, you know, reread that chapter before causing his Force apparition. Who knows? And I mean, that would be the only way. I mean, I get it when a lot of fans say that if they did bring him back, it would be kind of cheap. It would definitely cheapen the ending of The Last Jedi. But what I say to that is it depends. Because if you take the story in totality, and like you said, if Luke actually planned that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, if he actually became that powerful to the point where he could go between both worlds, no different. Because the fact that Yoda was able, and we all know how powerful Yoda was. Sure. And Yoda, granted, yes, he's had 900 years or plus of experience, but he still wasn't he doesn't have the genetic makeup of the Force, where like Luke does. And that's strong in his family. So the fact that if Luke was able to cross over to the other side and be able to jump back between both worlds, well, that would be the ultimate level of power. Because we always thought that, you know, even at the end of 8, we thought like, man, like, dude, how powerful do you have to be to project yourself like across the galaxy? And then like interact with people, and people can physically, and that's what I'm saying. Like they were able to physically touch him.
I was impressed when Vader was choking people from across. Exactly. Much less like appearing to people physically and
right. You're like on a complete starship having a conversation. Like you're FaceTiming with Darth Vader all of a sudden, and all of a sudden now you're getting choked. I mean, that just takes Ghost Dad's scene to a whole new level.
But one of the reasons why I always thought Yoda's power was more impressive is the fact that he has no relation to the Force. That he's that powerful just studying and just you know. So
just time.
Just had to say that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I honestly, I don't know. And there's a lot of rumors that saying Snoke is coming back.
Well, I can see that.
So if Snoke comes back and Luke comes back,
well,
we might get that duel that we've all been wanting.
But I will say this: that it would definitely be more impressive if Snoke, who was cut in half, came back.
Yeah,
Maul came back.
I mean,
I guess you know, I mean, anything's possible.
True.
All right.
Well, that wraps today up.
I think that wraps today's show up. You know, remember, hit us up on our Twitter, which is at Head to Head SW Podcast. And, you know, we'd love to hear from you guys on Facebook or Twitter. Same handle. Yep. So, you know, write us, send us your questions. Please submit us your questions. We'd love to answer you guys' questions.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I'm Eric Vancil.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.